Welcome again to the edge of your seat. This is the final episode of 2017 in 100 Films. Let's wrap this up. Geostorm is the type of film Leave Your Brain at the Door was created for. Gerard Butler plays the hulky, sulky scientist with a punch-first, ask-questions-never attitude, who created a global weather control system but was fired for being too much of a renegade badass. When the system breaks, he's the only one who can reboot it and save the world! There's also a load of bollocks about political conspiracy and family breakdown, but really, it's all about the silliest disaster porn since 2012. Despite how seriously it took itself, I laughed all the way through. Set in a recurring 24-hour period, Happy Death Day centres on Tree, a girl who gets multiple shots at solving and preventing her own murder. It's been described as slasher Groundhog Day, but to me, it's more like the supernatural episode Mystery Spot if it starred Buffy Summers. Despite a familiar setup, it's tense, twisty, funny, and surprisingly character-driven. Jessica Rothe makes a compelling final girl. My only real complaint was a singular lack of gore. Set in a recurring 24-hour period, Happy Death Day... Sorry, only kidding. It's worth pointing out I'm not really the target audience for the My Little Pony movie. I'm not a little child, the parent of a little child, or a brony. I've seen a few first season episodes, but they were probably out of order. But I still had fun with it. It's cute, it's charming, it's funny, it has catchy songs and engaging characters. The story is slightly generic and it does steer into the demographics I've mentioned, but that's entirely expected. For a film pretty much designed to rekindle nostalgia for 80s toys, I'll take this over Transformers any day. Thor Ragnarok is another fun Marvel film. It's also the third in a row to feature a strong and riveting antagonist. Cate Blanchett as Hela is a blast. Finally, the supposed villain problem seems fixed. The film manages to weave the title event of Ragnarok with the gladiatorial combat story of Planet Hulk reasonably well, though from a purely story side of things, there's little reason for Hulk to be there. But who really cares when him being there is so entertaining? The battles are ace, the soundtrack is kick-ass, the characters are wonderful. It's the best Thor film by a mile. Kenneth Branagh is behind both the camera and the ostentatious facial furniture in the film I like to call Mustache on the Polar Express. The actual title is basically the plot, with Agatha Christie's super sleuth Poirot on the case. In fairness, Branagh is rather good. He plays into the eccentricity and marks his gifts as flaws, but it still feels like he's eclipsing the cast in the same way that his Tash, you get the idea. It also feels tonally off. While the pacing is slick, there never feels to be much threat or peril, and it's only in the last few moments that there's any weight of consequence, and that's purely on Poirot himself. Paddington 2 is just adorable. This time round, the eponymous bear's good-natured mishaps land him in a prison framed for larceny and grievous Barbary harm. The Browns try to prove his innocence while Paddington befriends his fellow inmates. These prison sequences take up a good chunk of the film and have a very Grand Budapest Hotel quality that's oddly perfect. Like its predecessor, this film just oozes classic British charm and wonder whilst quietly promoting a modern inclusive society. It's perfect family viewing. Justice League is okay. It's better than Batman vs Superman and Suicide Squad, more fun than Man of Steel, but it falls well short of Wonder Woman. It's not a bad film, but it's not really good either. It's just weightless. The story follows the League forming to stop the evil and boring Steppenwolf from assembling the Mother Boxes, MacGuffins, and conquering the world. It's a basic plot that should leave plenty of room for character, but doesn't. Aquaman and Cyborg are completely underutilised, but Superman is the best he's been. He actually smiles under the CGI. It does feel like DC has taken criticism, tried to course correct, and it's probably as good as it could be under very tragic circumstances. Ultimately though, it's just a well-shot yet disposable fluff piece. The Florida Project documents the summer holiday of 6-year-old Mooney, a permanent resident of a tacky motel just outside Disney World. Most of the film is from her and her friend's perspective, a childlike look at the realities of poverty. Think the first act of Moonlight but with female friendship. There's that same sympathetic but coldly realistic quality to it. The whole cast is excellent, with a free-flowing naturalistic script and a camera set almost constantly at child level. Ingrid Goes West is hashtag so much cringe. Hashtag so much fun! Aubrey Plaza plays the title character, a lonely and demented pariah who lives vicariously through other people's Instagrams. She takes the idea of a social media stalker to extreme levels, using the app to track down her targets and using their vacuous posts as a guide for her own life. It's not particularly deep to point out how shallow Insta-fame is and how the meaningful relationships are still the ones that we make in person, but Plaza and Elizabeth Olsen, who's the object of her attention, sell the hell out of it. Hashtag blessed. In Brigsby Bear, the abducted protagonist James has spent his whole life in a bunker watching the fictional TV show Brigsby Bear Adventures. When he finally gets out and sees how big the world really is, all he wants to do is finish Brigsby, even if he has to make it himself. It's an odd little film about the creativity and trauma, and how even obsession can lead to connectivity. It's that rare film that is all about geek culture without being crammed with references, though the 80s sci-fi kids' cheese of the show is spot on. Battle of the Sexes sees Emma Stone play Billie Jean King and Steve Carell Bobby Riggs in the tennis match of women's lib versus male chauvinism. I was expecting a sports film with a resonant message, but it's also a rather touching romance and coming out story. The whole thing is beautiful, perfectly recreating that nicotine-stained look of the 70s, but it's also depressing how equal pay and equality are still issues that need addressing over 40 years on. Suburbicon is an odd film, and not really in a good way. Matt Damon is a family man who may be scamming an insurance company after his wife's murder. The dark heart of 50s suburbia idea is an interesting enough plot, even when it gets unpleasantly bloody. But the problem is that it happens side by side with an unconnected race riot that feels like it deserves its own film, or at least a fairer place in this one. It's not even thematically linked. Maybe the point is how we marginalise black communities and their problems, but there's got to be a better way of making that point than this. Wonder tells the story of a shy and facially disfigured boy's first year in middle school after a life dominated by reconstructive surgery and homeschooling. I was quite ready for trite schmaltz, but it's actually really effective. This is partly down to some great performances from several generations of cast, and partly by the narrative's determination not to let any character be anything less than three-dimensional. It's really emotional across the spectrum, and it's just really rather pleasant as well. Another great family film. The Man Who Invented Christmas is a bit of festive frivolity. Dan Stevens plays the titular Charles Dickens as he composes the classic A Christmas Carol. It's not often that Dickens is presented as a young man, and Stevens relishes the opportunity to bring a frenetic energy to the role. His characters literally appear and speak to him, with Christopher Plummer as Scrooge representing Dickens' own darker side. It's good, but it takes some historical liberties for heightened drama, and ultimately it feels like it should be a BBC special. Blade of the Immortal is the beautiful bloodbath story of Rin, a young girl seeking revenge for the brutal murder of her family. Her quest is aided by Manji, a tragic warrior whose life has been supernaturally and infinitely prolonged. The character and depth of the film really surprised me, with themes of loss and trust mingled with class critique of Japanese feudalism. But of course, the main attraction is the fighting, which is a finely choreographed ballet of bloody hacked limbs. It's an 18 for a reason, folks. The Disaster Artist is the biopic of Tommy Wiseau's making of The Room, the cult classic pinnacle of bad filmmaking. Unlike its inspiration, this is a solidly made, well-acted, coherently written story with genuine comedy, heart, and commentary on the human condition. There are obvious comparisons with the likes of Ed Wood, a weirdo outsider so committed to his creative ideal that he can't see his own lack of talent. My only reservation is that it can feel like a fan film, but it's still well worth checking out. Better Watch Out is a ho-ho horror that skips straight past naughty and ends up on the nasty list. The plot is a twist on classic home invasions, with nearly teens Luke and Garrett fending off a festive attack with the help of babysitter Ashley. The gore is surprisingly tame, with most of the horror coming from how far these people will go and how toxic an inherent sense of class and gender privilege can be. If you like your Christmas film sick and sinister, it's great fun. If not, stick to Home Alone. Star Wars The Last Jedi is the latest in the main Skywalker saga. The plot sees Rey training with Luke whilst the First Order pursue the Resistance. There are echoes of Empire and Jedi, but this is its own beast. If Episode 7 was ultimately about taking on the mantle of great legacy, Episode 8 is about forging a new one entirely. That means it does often feel very different, and that's mostly a good thing, except for Finn's subplot, which can throw off the pacing a bit in the middle for the sake of a moral. But there are enough surprises to keep it going. The cast is great, the porgs are adorable, and the visuals are incredible. And for the haters, I find your lack of faith disturbing. The Greatest Showman is the new musical about the life of P.T. Barnum. Hugh Jackman plays Barnum himself and is a joy to watch. He's back in full stage show performance mode, and that love of performance is shared by the whole cast. The choreography is pure Broadway, but the songs are anachronistically pop, giving the whole thing a Moulin Rouge flavour. Like that film, this is all about the show, historical accuracy be damned. If you want the glitz and glamour, you'll love it, but if you're after a biopic, look elsewhere. Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle is the long-awaited official sequel to the Robin Williams classic. This time, the game has morphed into an Atari-style console that sucks the players in as their avatars. So, high school stereotypes become 90s gaming tropes. If you go in with the nostalgia goggles for the original welded to your face, you may hate it. But honestly, it's just silly fun that sends up gaming conventions. I started this list reviewing a shitty game film, so I'm relieved that I can end it with a decent one. Well, that was my 2017. What did you watch in 2017? Comment below, the good, the bad, the totally bizarre. Feel free to lob suggestions at me and I'll see what I can review.